welcome to another edition of Reptile Fight Club. We got a great episode today. I'm very excited. Got Ron St. Pierre on. And I butcher your name in the first out the gate right there. But excited to have Ron on. He's I've known him for quite a while, and he's done some amazing things in herpetoculture. So I'm your host, Justin Julander, and with me as always is Mr. Chuck Poland.
Yeah, Ron's so awesome. He's the first one introduced, right? He's like,
yeah,
he's main right. Bill. He's main Bill on the show tonight.
We don't wait to introduce the big dogs.
Yeah, nope. Yeah. Up front row seats, VIP. Ron.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was.
Thanks for coming on, dude.
Yeah, really humbled. I was listening to one of Ron's interviews, and he mentioned our podcast. I'm like, oh man, that's high praise for sure. So we had to get him on, and we had to practice a little bit on other people before we bring on Mr. St. Pierre.
I mean, you guys named it after a movie that is very near and dear to me. That is very. I mean, that movie pretty much espouses my worldview almost to a T. So, yeah. Just when I heard you guys were doing this, I was like, "That's fucking awesome."
Yeah. It is. It is a great one of the great movies.
Yeah. But it's been fun. We enjoy hitting these topics and seeing kind of both sides of different issues and things like that. So, yeah. So I don't know. This week's been kind of crazy with work. We reports going out and stuff, but reptile wise, man, my female blackhead is swelling up nice and huge.
Nicely?
Yeah. I think she's ovulating now or she's ovulated and the eggs are getting close to being laid. She usually lays kind of earlier in the season. So I'm really hoping I can get them to go the distance this year because, man, they've been a thorn in my side for a while. So I'm excited to see her progressing in the right direction anyway. So yeah. See how it goes. Yeah. I had a pair of inlands locked up this week as well. So
nice. Is that so that's the unrelated Schofield line? Or the Schofield,
we'll call them the AAR line, right?
There you go. Yeah. Sorry, man. No, you can do that. You should be able to do that.
Yeah, these are offspring from that original pairing of the Schofield line and an unrelated male. So
nice.
They should be really nice looking animals.
Remind me and forgive me. Have you reproduced that? Have you gotten eggs from that pairing previously and hatched out?
Yeah. I mean,
was it lopsided? Is that what it was?
Originally, it had quite a few females.
The first one. Yeah.
I've got a bunch of females, only like one or two males. So I still have that original male as well, but yeah. So
the harem problem is not the worst one to have.
Yeah, that's for sure. You could have a lot worse problems, but I probably got to find another male here down the road. So
yeah.
How about you? What's going on with you?
Not much. I'm in that typical, like, where I'm looking at my animals and I'm like, this whole year's a bust. Looks great. I don't know what's going on. So that's pretty much where I'm at. I've got a day geckos that are starting to build and lay. So, looks like their season's starting to kind of start up again. So, still got Williamside that are laying and hatching, and so kind of a little bit of everything going on here, and so we'll see what I really end up what we really end up doing. But I feel like I'm right on track for how I feel. Like, it looks good. Oh, it's horrible. It's awful. It's a total bust. No, not quite. Yep. So we'll see.
I've got the panic with a couple of my projects as well.
Yeah,
I really want some stuff to go, and it's like, they don't always play along, but
no. And I feel like they like to mess with you. Like, I was looking at the female Tracier like last week and she looked really promising and I was like, oh great. And now I'm looking at her and I'm like, wait, what's going on? No, was that an ovulation? That didn't look like an ovulation. Oh no, what's going on? So, that's why I'm like, so like hands off with stuff where it's just like, put it together when I know it generally like breeds, and just whatever happens, man. Cause I can't be so emotionally invested in that stuff anymore. I'm too old. I've got health problems on the horizon for me. I don't need to add to that. You know what I mean? I just don't need to add to that.
Yeah. Speaking of being vested, we need to respond to some proposed legislation that's passed the House and is getting into the Senate here for them to evaluate and pass or reject it. So this is proposed legislation that could negatively impact pretty much all pet keeping except for puppies and kitties. So if you like to keep anything other than dogs and cats, you need to write your senators today, right now, when you're listening to this, or hopefully you've already done it, and let them know this could damage businesses. This can damage our rights as Americans. A lot of different things are at stake here. So definitely write your senators right now. If you
time to be heard. Time to be heard.
And there's a lot of useful and helpful things on the USARC site, usarc.org. And also, if you don't support them, it'd be a great opportunity to donate to USARC and to have them help us with our legal issues and to combat things like this. So very important, very critical right now. So we need to make sure this doesn't pass. I know you've probably written many letters so far, Ron, and are fighting this, I'm sure. But,
yeah, I mean, we're doing what we can. We maintain a fairly constant status with USARC and USARC Florida, and Heather's been all over the internet, promoting, letting people know, ringing the bell that potentially catastrophic. I've been at this for 40 years and I know that this is similar to the bill that was proposed in 2009 that was shot down. But the way this one came through, I think is significantly more concerning, even though that was pretty scary when that one came through.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll work against it, kind of sneaking it in a big bill. I guess that's how most legislation passes these days. So, but hopefully we don't have to fight it on the other end. Hopefully we can nip it in the bud and get it pulled out of there before it gets passed.
Yeah, it's actually a stunning indictment of our process that they pass these massive bills that these people sign off on that they've never even read.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
I mean, what the hell are we paying them for?
Yeah. That should, and just the fact that they're just conglomerate this huge, mishmash of different.
That has nothing to do with any of the quote, whatever it was. I forget the name of it. It's America Competes Act.
Yeah.
And inside of it has a giant sword that would essentially, destroy an entire industry and take out billions of dollars out of the economy and wreck people's lives and all kinds of stuff. So
it's ridiculous how off track, we're letting legislation get, where it's just like, it just doesn't, it's like these just home wrecking things that come through under the guise of like positive regulation of something. And it's just, I don't know. It's so sick. As somebody who kind of believes in the free enterprise and the spirit of America, and I'm a veteran and I'm all these things. It's just like, get your head out of your collective asses, politicians, and like it's just ridiculous. It makes me sick.
Yeah.
Well, and they've done a good job at convincing people that they're essentially powerless against this. And really, the reality of it and the truth of it is that the individuals, all of us, we hold all of the power. We are the base of that pyramid. And if you kick the base out from under that pyramid, the shit at the top is going to crash.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, all you have to do is stop participating.
Yeah.
Just stop endorsing all of this crap and say no more, and force them. But if you look at the way everything's all divided up right now, and people don't trust their neighbors, one guy hates the other guy because of all these things.
Yeah. The dumb divisions, and meanwhile lobbyists and big money are, running it all in a back room.
Laughing all the way to the bank.
Yep,
100%, 100%.
They want to sow that separation and fighting amongst ourselves.
The paralysis of people is 100% in their interest to,
Yeah, this isn't a Democrat or a Republican issue. This is an American issue. If you want to have the rights to keep,
exactly how people need to look at everything.
And I think the one thing that I guess I'm heartened by, that even at our level of division, I hear people who maybe politically are so far away from the way I view things, and you start to talk to them and they feel exactly the same way you do about politicians and about politics and about the bullshit. So we're getting closer and closer to all agreeing that this is crap, that nobody's going to take it anymore. And you may be way on the other side of the fence from me politically, but we both agree that this is bullshit and nobody's going to stand for it. And I think, once we get there and everybody's rowing in the same boat, things will change. But as long as they're trying to throw us all into different boats and have us row different directions, it's never going to work. It's just
That's exactly it, man.
Yeah.
That is exactly it.
Well said, Mr. Chuck.
Yep.
All right. Well, again, I mean, if you know how to copy and paste, you can write a letter to your senator. Just use the stuff that the U.S. ARC has provided for us, or write your own stuff. I kind of tried to personalize a little bit to maybe feed into the politician's ego, like, hey, I really like what you've been doing lately, or, I'm really proud of you for this or that, now do this for me. Stop this bill. So, but together we can get this nipped in the bud. So don't hesitate. Don't wait. Get it done. Right.
And I mean, not to say that they don't read your mail, Justin, but I think just the volume speaks to them. So the more you do,
they don't
the
have
more
to read
often
it.
you do. They don't. They certainly they're not reading it. Maybe a staffer might, like you might catch a here or there, but I honestly really doubt that if they're not even reading the bill, they're not reading the hate mail that comes from the bill. You know what I mean? Like, so flood them with tons of it, give them more than they can handle so that the volume speaks, the word.
That's what it will do it. Yeah. If they see there's enough of their constituents that are clamoring for this, then they're going to listen. So we only have power in numbers, guys. So let's get that out there.
Teamwork makes the dream work. That's what we say at work.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's be a team.
Yep.
All right. Well, we're really thrilled, like we said before, to have you on here, Ron, and thanks for doing this. And why don't you introduce yourself for anybody who's living in a hole in the ground and doesn't know who you are? I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but how do you fit into herpetoculture and that kind of thing?
I mean, I've been a professional herpetoculturist since the 1980s or so now. I started when I was a kid. I was like 17, 18 when I really started breeding stuff. And I don't know. I've worked with a lot of stuff. I'm responsible, however whether you look at this negatively or positively, but I'm responsible for blue tegus and albino blue tegus and blood boas and just a
motley boas.
Motley boas, yeah. So today we're still trying to break new ground. We're working out husbandry and commercial systems for giant anola species, and we're working on Parsons chameleons and monkey tail skinks and all kind of stuff. Monitors,
some killer monitors, man. I drool every time I think about the monitors you have over there. Those specs are high. That's cool stuff. I'm hoping you're going to have a lot of luck with those and get some more eggs.
So far not so much, but we'll see. Supposedly right now is the time of the year where they do something, but like you guys, I'm in that part of the year where I'm like, fuck, nothing's going to do anything. And everything sucks. And, just waiting for a comet to fall on me kind of deal. But no, I learned a long time ago, you just got to leave shit alone and let it go.
That's right.
It's to be, it's to be. And if it's not, then it's not. But most of the time, more often than not, you end up in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Well, that's I enjoyed your interviews on some of the other NPR interviewed you a while back, and just listening to your stories from back in your collecting days. So there's some good stuff. Go check out those if you haven't heard them. But he's got some really hilarious stories and some pretty sketchy near misses or not so near misses, right?
Yeah, almost lost a nut, missing half a nipple.
Yeah.
I've had my injuries, man. Turns out you don't grab giant Nile sawshell turtles unless you know which way their head is.
Yeah, those things have some
smart to jump on those.
So, no one can argue your commitment, Ron.
Yeah,
no one can argue your commitment.
Yep. All right. Well, we've got you on here to talk about reptile choices. Do reptiles make the best choices for themselves? So we're gonna fight about that topic today. If they are given unlimited choices or whatnot. So we're gonna go ahead and flip the coin, see who gets to debate you. Out of my co-host Chuck or myself. So you want to call it, Chuck?
Sure.
You got a pretty confident title there.
I figured I would goad you with my title, no matter which way the coin toss goes. So,
okay, call it.
Tails.
Oh, it is tails.
Because it's always tails. Has anybody noticed this? I called heads the last time, and I think I lost. So I'm like, I'm going tails.
All right. Well, you want to debate him, or do you want to let me?
I'm going to let you do it.
All right.
Is that cool? Are you cool with that, Justin?
Oh, definitely.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Ron, you good with that?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right.
Okay.
I've known the fucker since he was a kid, so
yeah, there you go. Dad's gonna whoop your ass, Justin.
No, definitely. All right, Ron, you can call it for which side of the topic you get. What's your call?
Oh, what side?
Yeah, heads or tails.
Just heads or tails.
Heads. It's tails.
Chuck was right. Tails, Ron.
Man.
I know. I see that.
Wow, that's crazy.
He swears that. So I think he might, and I'm just saying.
He's got a two-tailed coin.
Exactly, and he's got a two-sided coin. Yeah, see, that's what he shows everybody else.
Oh yeah. I'm just faking everybody out.
He's a doctor and apparently a magician as well. So.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to take the con side. The reptiles don't really make good choices, and so I'll give you yes, they do great if they're given the opportunities. They'll make good choices. So
I appreciate.
Does that work? All right.
That's my alley, man.
Okay, that's what I figured. You have a lot of good insights. That's another thing that I really got out of your podcast was the use of like desert reptiles, of like the dew, the morning dew and stuff, the dew point. Mm-hmm. I've been thinking a lot about that lately. So thank you for putting that in my brain. So
I appreciate that, man. It was just an observation I made collecting veil chameleons, and
that's how the good stuff comes out, right? Is watching these things, seeing what they do in the wild. And if you don't really know what they do in the wild, it's probably a little harder to keep them in captivity. So, all right. Well, I'm going to let you lead out. Have you lead us out, and we'll start the debate there. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm kind of agnostic actually to this. This is something that I do. I'm somewhat in the middle, I suppose, but I'm pretty much that way in everything. I really don't have, like a very hard, fast rule system for what I do or what I've noticed. Matter of fact, when I think I know something, I usually have something stab me in the face and prove that I don't know shit.
Yeah.
But primarily the way I do things is, it's basically kind of like the God in the Garden of Eden kind of thing. I build a setup and I try to supply them with everything that I possibly think they could need and give them multiple levels and layers so that they can make their own choices depending on the species and what I feel is appropriate, for that species based on, where it's from, what its habits are, or at least what I believe its habits are. It's hard to really know for sure unless you're actually go and see these things in the wild. But
sure, yeah.
And then I just I step back. I set everything up in pairs for the most part. I'm the opposite of Phil, who you had on last couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Me and Phil will give each other shit about that all the time. But yeah, I kind of then I stand back and I leave it alone, and then I only intervene if there's a problem. But I do, we do monitor things pretty well. And actually, when Heather and I got together, she was pretty much the opposite. She was more like Phil. She kept everything separate and did a lot of control stuff. And over time, we've kind of fused the two systems together. Like I've adopted some of the things she does, and she's adopted a lot of the things I do. And
hey, that makes for a good partnership, right?
Yeah, it actually. I've broke more ground in the last 4 or 5 years with her than I did the previous 30 years.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we've made a lot of like serious advancements here that I'm pretty happy with. So
that's awesome.
But that's to me that's what works is that by building the system and letting them do their thing, they know better than I'm going to know, in my opinion, what they need, and then I let them choose it. But there are caveats to that.
Yeah. And that's kind of what this is all about, is kind of things that you should watch out for or be careful of. So that would lead me to my first point of animals that aren't used to cold. And you probably, you're seeing this in your backyard, probably with the invasive iguanas. They don't come from a very cold area. So when it gets cold, they start falling out of trees and, they don't know how to behave. And there's some animals that, more tropical, that don't experience that kind of cold. And so they don't really know what to do. They don't know to seek, cover or thermal stable areas to weather out the cold, the really cold times. And so they can, die out in the elements because they don't know what to do. So, giving them or keeping them outside, I imagine that's probably a concern for you. If you have a cold snap and you have stuff outside that maybe doesn't know what to do when it gets cold, they need to be brought inside or taken care of in some way so they can figure it out. I've even heard of, I can't remember who was telling me this, but they had a species outdoor, and they even had like a hide area with like a bulb that would warm them up, so it'd keep them at a certain temperature. And they didn't even go inside that, they didn't know to seek that warm hideout when it started getting cold. So I think maybe if they're raised in the environment and they kind of experience from a young age and see, I go here and it's warm, then maybe they're okay. But yeah, something to, that would be probably my first point of when reptiles, if they have those, all sorts of options, they may not know what to do with certain conditions.
Yeah, that's actually absolutely the case. I just went through this myself 2 weeks ago. Last week it rained here for 5 days, and it was in the 50s during the day and in the upper 30s at night, which for Florida is fairly unusual to be that cold and pouring down rain for multiple days. It was actually one of the worst things that I've ever personally gone through. And I more or less knew how to manage it, but we have so much stuff that we couldn't possibly bring all this stuff in.
Yeah.
And it's all set up in a way with, that they have subfloors that are warm because they're buried under a couple inches of mulch and they're below the ground. But you always get these dumbasses that don't want to go in them. And I went out there at like 9 o'clock at night, and I shined the light up on one of the things, and there's a big monitor just laying out in the freaking cold, and that would have froze to death. I had to go out there and get it, and it was 8 feet in the air on a basking platform, and I had to grab it, stick it in a box, bring it inside. So yeah, that's why I said there's caveats, and I do have to intervene on occasion with stuff like that. That said, though, probably a good 80 to 90% of the stuff here was in its either super tropical stuff. We do give some heat, but almost everything here we don't use any heat at all. Basically, the subfloor is warm enough. If it's 35 degrees at night, it'll still be in the 50s underneath that floor. And in the morning, the sun comes up and hits it, and the cages rocket up to 90 degrees. So they don't experience super cold temperatures for longer than a few hours at night. So most of them know to go underneath the floor. And like I said, about 80 to 90% of them choose it on their own, and I don't have to do anything. So, if you look at it that way, then the preponderance is that they do tend to make the right decisions, but obviously everything's an individual and they're not little clones. So
yeah. Well, and I mean, if they've never experienced it or don't have kind of that genetic programming to escape cold, then that's understandable.
The one that I had to pull in, he knows all about it, and he's a lace
should know better. Yeah, they come from pretty
they
cool
get cold
climates.
where they're at.
Sure.
This wasn't his first rodeo, but he decided,
I've found heat here before. I'm going to sit here and wait till the heat comes again. Or yeah, that's well. You mentioned the keeping in pairs, and I really like to keep my stuff in pairs together because they'll catch each other's cues, reproductive
Correct.
cues. And like, I think Chuck and I were talking about this last week with his, Halmaheras. He doesn't really see locks between his Halmaheras, and they breed and everything's good. Oh, Tracy, that's Halmaheras, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why it's based on that. Okay. Sometimes I get those scrubs mixed up in my head, but okay. So, when I find the same thing, when I keep species together, they usually don't have a lot of, obvious courtship or breeding behavior. And so they just get the job done when the female's ready. So if you're keeping them separate, though, introducing a male into a female's cage or something, he can just kind of go nuts with the pheromones and not being around a female for a long time. And they'll just breed, even if it's not really a productive mating, and so that'll stress out the female and wear him out and use up his energy. Whereas if you're keeping them together, that doesn't really happen. They kind of leave each other alone or at least hang out or something, but he's not always trying to mate with the female. And it's also helpful too, if you're keeping them together, because you might, if you start seeing breeding behavior, it's on, and you can kind of make notes and record from there. But yeah, that would be another thing where they're not making the best choice. They're wasting their energy. They're not really sensitive to cues maybe as much as they would be if they were kept together, if they're housed individually.
It is interesting though that they do seem to have hard triggers. Like barometric changes seem to be hard triggers for breeding, and it's like you don't necessarily see it like the same, but I still see, like, I don't know when my animals breed, but I know they disappear when I suspect that they're breeding. And oh, by the way, it's correlated to a barometric, a drop in barometric pressure. So I'm kind of like, all right, that's probably what that is. So I don't know, but I think that's interesting too, that there's just certain environmental triggers that will cause them to breed. But certainly I agree, that whole like, put them in the cage and they go right at it thing definitely just disappears when you cohab.
You keep them together. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Just, the idea that they know better than I do. I'm kind of with you where you said, I let them do their thing, put them together and they do their thing. And I try not to get in the way. I really identify with that as well, because I can't smell their hormonal, pheromonal cues or whatever. So I'm sure they can though. So, that's leave it to them. And that, that has other challenges, of course. You got to have a bigger cage, and at feeding time, it might be tricky to separate them for feeding or get them to not beat up on each other to steal food or whatnot. I don't know how many times I've had to separate two big pythons that have bit on the same rat or on each other because there was movement and they smell rat in the room. So yeah, but usually I think I've had one fatality where a female mistook a male for prey and ended up eating him or killing him or whatever. So, but it doesn't happen often. Usually it's just fine. Even if they bite each other, it doesn't really last or have lasting damage. Yeah. Yeah.
I actually had one snake swallow another snake's head.
Oh,
and I caught it, and then I pulled it and got it out. And the one that had its head halfway shoved down the boa's throat, I wobbled for a couple seconds, was covered in like slime, and pissed off, but it was fine after that.
That's fine. That was one of the original rough scale pythons that John Weigel collected. It was being consumed by an olive python, and they found it while it was consuming it, and they rescued this male rough scale python, and it went on to produce the majority of rough scales in captivity in Australia at the time. Yeah,
that's a cool story.
Yeah, right.
That's a double lottery winner rough scale right there.
Yeah. I bet he was happy they came along.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. That's kind of why I started doing the cohabbing thing a long time ago, is that I just felt like there's no possible way that I could catch everything when it was at the right time. I mean, it's just too easy to miss stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in some I think it does work in a lot of cases. Some cases it's that the person doing it is so sensitive to it. Like in Phil's case, I think Phil Litz, he's kind of on a different level with those Uromastyx than almost everybody. And that dude is like hyper dedicated.
Yeah.
Like I'm just not that fucking dedicated, man. I want to fucking play World of Warcraft. I want to watch movies and shit.
Yeah.
And I like my 5 months off in the wintertime where I just hardly have any interaction with any other animals.
Uh-huh.
So I like the hibernation thing, But Phil is like hardcore all the time. I mean, he's so hardcore, he wears me out. So he catches that stuff. And I think if you're a Phil, and you're really hyper focused, I think you can probably pull it off more often than not. But I think for most of us, we're busy with other shit. Or don't give a fuck.
And I think I get like to write about here in the season, and I'm like, I have no fucking idea what's going on. That right there lets me know that I have no business being the introducer of pairings, right? Like I'm just like, take me out of this.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm the same way. I just, so I think for most of us, I think it's just a better strategy.
Yeah.
As long as you can, make sure that, you do have to monitor them, and make sure nobody's beating each other up. And we have enough extra enclosures that if there is a problem, we can separate and then reintroduce later on. And most of the time that works. I've actually, while I'm talking to you, I can't recall a death related to that. Certainly not in the last decade or so.
Yeah.
So
I saw an interesting post this week. Apologies, I can't remember who it was, but they talked about one of their, I believe it was a Tristis monitor, had gotten, the female had a busted up arm. She had bled a little, so they figured, tried to see what was going on, and then the male was actually breeding the female, and the female looked okay, like he wasn't trying to hurt her or anything, and so they kind of let it ride and to see what would happen. And a couple days later, she was using her arm fine, and the bites or whatever were healing. And I mean, they usually kind of figure things out. And once in a while, you'll get an antisocial animal that'll just will try to rip apart anything that gets near it. It's not going to be the best animal for you to keep. You might want to rehouse that one with somebody who just wants a pet. But for the most part, I think they know how to kind of work things out, or you see that with the blue tongues quite a bit. Like I keep my blue tongues individually just because I don't have the space in my room. But when I put them outside, I'll put them out together and kind of let them work out. But you'll know when the female's done with the male and when she's ready to have him gone, because they sometimes will beat each other up, But again, that's probably a little antisocial behavior because I'm keeping them singly. Do you keep pairs, or do you keep groups?
We have around 50 blue tongues here, comprised of 5 or 6 species, all in pairs year round. I never separate, but in most cases they were raised together as pairs, and they've never been separate. So they have a big tube, and we use probably much larger caging than what most people use. Because I can get away with that because I have the luxury of being able to do them outside. If I had to do them inside, I would probably still do them in pairs, but I would definitely not have as many, and it would be much more difficult to pull off. Because for them also, I mean, I feel like I would totally miss them, especially since, I don't know about yours, but ours, I rarely see ours. I mean, we have a ton of them, and it's really hard to get a glimpse of them because dart into their tubes as soon as you
Yep.
walk by. So they're, you just never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I go out there. That's what we do basically is in the spring, we start walking them on a daily basis, the enclosures, looking for babies. And oh, hey, there's 19 babies in here.
Yeah.
It's like,
That's always fun to find a cage, like, especially when you're not really, like, you don't know if they're going to have them or not. And all of a sudden you see, a bunch of babies.
dude, I can tell you a story about those blue tongues that I haven't really talked about. But when I set those up, we bought these. Wayne Hill sold me these huge black tubs, right? They're like 6 feet long.
Yeah.
And I ripped the bottoms out of them so that when it rains, the water drains out. And I usually replace the bottoms with 1/4-inch wire, right?
Yeah.
But I was fucking lazy, and I had all this 1-inch lattice laying around, this PVC lattice stuff. So I was like, you know what? That's super easy. I can just cut that, screw it under the bottom, and then because they're not going to get out of it. It's too big, and it'll be buried under a foot or so of substrate. So I cut them all. I slapped that shit on the bottom, and then I set up all these huge rows of these tubs for them things. Then I backfilled them with dirt, buried a pipe, and backfilled that on top with leaf litter. Okay.
Yeah.
So a year goes by, I'm feeding them, they're eating, everybody's doing good. And all of a sudden they stop eating what I'm putting in there. Right. And I'm like, maybe they're going off feed for some reason. It's weird, but whatever. So a month goes by. Every time we see them, they're fat as hell. And we're like, what the hell's going on? And I'm like, they're not. And Heather's like, well, what are you feeding these? And I'm like, I'm not. They're not eating anything. It turns out that when I set this up, apparently I created the perfect environment for a giant burrowing roach that naturally lives in Florida.
Really?
And those enclosures were so full of them that these skinks have been gorging themselves. Our skinks and our ackies.
Yeah.
Our ackies are doing this too. That's all they eat.
Really?
I put in
awesome.
food. They don't give a shit what I put in there because they're getting all these wild roaches. And man, the stuff looks great.
Wow. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a weird, I don't think I could ever replicate this again, but right now we have 50 blue tongues that don't have to be fed. They're getting all wild roaches, and it doesn't seem to stop.
Huh. So there's kind of an equilibrium there. They're not eating them into extinction or whatever. That's really cool. That's what you want, right? That's like
right?
Yeah, it reminds me of a
bioactive thing.
Yeah. Like Burt Langerwerf would have killed for a cage like that, right?
I know.
Yeah.
That's cool. I couldn't believe it. And I didn't realize it was happening with the Ackies until I pulled the adult Ackies the other day, and they were all huge and they haven't eaten in 4 months.
Wow.
So I was like, and then I started taking their hiding areas apart, and all the roaches were in there. So they're eating those too.
Really? So are they a native? Like,
yeah, it's a big native. Where I live is on a thing called the Lake Wales Ridge. It's the driest part of Florida. Basically, it's one of the only parts that was above, the water, the ocean at one point. It's pretty much always. That's why there's lots of fossil mammoths and stuff here. But
cool.
So we have this unusual, basically, habitat here, and there's a native large burrowing roach that I didn't even know existed.
It's a good way to discover it.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of weird, man.
I thought it was doing good. I threw a bunch of mealworm beetles in my roach colony, and then they started like breeding, and so I've got a mixed colony of insect feeders, and so I don't really have to buy feeders for my insectivorous lizards, and it's been really nice.
Yeah, I love doing stuff like that.
Yeah,
man. There's all kind of little things you can do to tweak it so that you get, you're a little more efficient, and that's definitely one of the ways. It's a whole lot better than some of the alternatives. But
well, that's interesting. So I guess I'm curious. So this can fall in really well with the conversation. But so they had the choice. You were giving them other food items. What were you offering, like the Ackies or the blue tongue? Just
Well, I mean, in the Ackies case, they get offered a variety of insects, and I noticed the crickets were building up. They were just ignoring them. They weren't really gorging on superworms like they had done in the past. But I really didn't realize there were that many in the Ackies until a couple days ago. Like I had taken them off food back in November because we keep them outside. They're in a large group and they're in a big enclosure. And the enclosure has an entire case of cork bark all stacked up. So it's got all these crevices, and
That's cool.
so when they're in there, you don't really, I never see them unless they're out basking and they act wild. They dive in.
Yeah.
But it's winter, so they're hibernating. And then Heather wanted to check on them. So we went out there on a warm day, and I started taking everything apart. And I'm like, look at these fat bastards. They haven't lost any weight at all. And when I got to the last, layers, I started peeling back, and there were the same roaches that are in the blue tongues were in there.
Wow.
So I was like, wow, this is really working. So I wish I could get them. I mean, I'm sure they're in with the bearded dragons and probably the Spencers are not really losing weight either, like I thought. So they may be getting them too.
Yeah.
But they're enclosures.
Do you have like decomposition going in there, Ron? So this reminds me. So I used to do a lot of composting. And so you use like an open bottom container, and you put all your greens and your browns in there, and all of I call them the FBI, this fungus, bacteria, invertebrates. They all come right up into there, and you can find grubs and all kinds of stuff in there. And I'm just wondering if there's some kind of a bioactive churn going on there at the surface that are kind of bringing them up in.
So what it is we live on a 5-acre property that is covered in oak trees, and we have probably a foot deep oak leaf.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I've been using those oak leaves for everything. I put them in. That's what I use to kind of hibernate, proof them, and stuff like that. Because I have. And actually, I never even thought to use that, man. I was watching some fucking YouTube video that had the guys from Josh's Frogs where they were like, "Oh yeah, we buy all these leaves," and I was like, "Holy crap!
I've got some leaves.
Got millions of dollars worth of leaves here. I may as well start using them."
Yeah.
So anyway, so I started screwing around with them, and it turns out that it is probably decomposition caused by the leaves that brings the roaches in, and then they just whatever, maybe having the water bowls in there gives them a water source, and then they start breeding in the enclosures, and it's just this crazy accidental thing that happened. Yeah, and so it's saving us a lot of money. To be honest.
That's what you want.
That's a win food pyramid right there, man.
Right? Yeah, I mean, the Ackies and blue tongues aren't really costing us anything to produce right now. So as long as this holds up, pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm obviously adding a lot more Ackies and blue tongues to that.
Yeah.
Do you use the subfloor with your Ackies, or is it just the cork bark? Okay.
Well,
does that prove a challenge when you're collecting eggs, or how do you?
No, that I have no. So for the Ackies, we have basically no. The substrate that's there is not deep enough for them to lay eggs, and then they have a little fake termite mounds you make with the plastic boxes. Yeah, and they use that 100% of the time.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So
that's cool.
Yeah, with anything that we have the subfloor in, I keep the substrate very, very sparing until wintertime, and then I'll actually build it up, unopened bags of cypress mulch on top of them. So that acts like an extra insulator.
Yeah. There's a guy in Salt Lake up here that keeps Russian tortoises outdoors year round, and he'll just put some like straw bales or something, and then like a tarp to keep the snow out, and he'll find babies crawling around in the spring, little hatchling tortoises.
That's a good idea.
I mean, that's like idea. I don't know, that's kind of my dream someday, is to have like a self I don't know, I remember, I think it was Frank Reedy's that had like some eggs that he missed in one of his cages, and they hatched out in the cage, and he had these little monsters.
Yeah, I've had that happen.
That's the coolest, I guess. But
I mean, back when I was breeding Australian water dragons, one day I went out. I didn't know that anything was going on with those. And one day I went out there, and there's baby Australian water dragons staring at me, and I was, what the hell is that? Yeah. I thought it was a brown anole at first, and I looked, and I was like, oh shit, that's a water dragon. And I started looking around. There was a lot more water dragons in that enclosure. So
that's cool.
I was like, man, I'm glad that the wire was 1/4 inch on that one.
Yeah, right.
So after that, anything that's basically, we build our enclosures based around the size of the hatchlings. That's what the wire and setups we use, just in case you miss stuff.
Yeah,
because it happens.
So maybe I'll switch up the topics a little bit. So you're a boa guy, or have worked with a lot of boas, and so I'm more of a python fellow myself. But so I've heard that boas sometimes will seek heat at the wrong times, like when they're gravid, and that can kind of ruin litters of boas. Is there any truth to that? Are they if a female seeks heat at the wrong time, they could potentially ruin their litters?
I mean, that's entirely possible. Back when I was working with boas, I was living in Miami at the time. I lived in a little unaired. It had no air. The house I lived in had no AC or anything. It was just it was basically like a beach house that they had built in the 50s. It was concrete, and they were really smartly designed. So even if you lived in Miami, they were still reasonably cool, even in the summer.
Yeah.
So what I did with the boas was I had them in a room that I just left the windows open all the time. And it was more or less the Terry Phillip method, which, you control the room temperature and you don't really give any kind of supplemental heat. So
I think that's where that idea came from, actually, now that I think about it. So I was talking to Terry and we were talking about kind of this topic of, giving him choices and stuff. And he said they were, I think it was a boa species, some island boa species that they were struggling to produce or get to breed in captivity, or somebody, like a research station had set up a colony of them. And so they went to the island to kind of see what was going on. And I guess like for a certain time of the year, they would live on this part of the island where it never got any sun, and they were always kind of colder and that kind of thing. And then during, after they'd ovulated and were getting, had developing offspring, they'd move to this warmer area. I'm probably butchering the story, but kind of that's what stuck in my mind, that they, and so the people keeping them in captivity just gave them kind of a basking light year-round kind of thing, and they didn't have them be colder at certain times of the year during the breeding season and stuff, and so they just weren't and the females would go bask, so they're thinking, they want the heat, they need that heat, and so they'd leave the basking light in there, but in reality it was what was preventing them from having success. So I think reptiles especially may make poor choices, again, if they don't, if it's not in their wheelhouse, or they're not used to this, might make poor choices of seeking heat when they probably shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I'm sure there are probably as many cases. I shouldn't say that. There are probably outliers, and that's probably an outlier, an aberration of the rule. And it's also, there's a case where, not all species are created equal. Some are not as smart as others. So, I mean, if you're working with more intelligent species, which, lizards, I may be totally wrong, but from my experience, I've always felt like lizards were an order of magnitude more intelligent than snakes, but it could just be, let me before I get all the hate mail from the snake guys, it could very well just be that lizards just display it in a way, and snakes just don't display it, but they actually, in a way that humans can easily, or we think we're reading it anyway. But I mean, I love snakes. Snakes are just, they're very, they're all about, eating, procreating, and that's it. And I've just never seen them do anything like, you see the stuff that some of the monitors do that verges on what would, and I'm probably anthropomorphizing here, but it looks like it looks like puppies playing, or cats engaging in that kind of behavior. So, I mean, like I said, I don't know. I'm agnostic to the whole thing, but that's just an observation that I've made.
Yeah, lizards do seem much more complex in their behaviors and the range of behaviors and things. So I would agree with you there. Yeah.
Although I appreciate snakes for the cold, heartless, solitary predators that
they get the job done, don't they?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that another funny post I saw this week was Brandon Shiflett, Rare Earth Reptiles. He had one of his Egernia, one of the spiny-tailed skinks that had gotten stuck in a hole. It was trying to emerge out of a cork bark tube, and it went through a hole and it got stuck. He said he saw it like,
I've seen that.
When the lights are going out. And so, and then he saw it there in the morning again. So he's like, oh, he's probably stuck. And he had to break apart the cork bark to get him out of there. And so, I would, say that not all lizards are genius.
Oh, no, for sure.
Yeah.
They
might make some stupid moves, trying to get into crevices or spaces that are too small for him. And I had a pet boa when I was growing up that would always do that. He'd always try to go through the crack on the door, so the door would be open, and he'd wedge his head in there and start trying to crawl through, and he couldn't move forward or backwards, and I'd have to work him out of there. But yeah, it was always a frustrating snake. To anytime you let it cruise around or something, it would get itself into a jam.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I've probably seen plenty of that.
Yeah. Well, and there's that famous picture of the monitor lizard with its head in a beer can out in the somebody found it dead in the outback. Tried to go into a beer can. Yeah, not the best choice there. So I think sometimes they'll be have some stupid moves there in the wild.
In all fairness, I don't know to what level monitors experience beer cans on a regular basis.
That's a good point. That's kind of I think Chuck's just trying to justify because he used to get his head stuck in the banister, and he
hasn't everybody? Is that that's not a common problem?
When I was a little kid, I stuck a fork in a socket. So
nice.
My ass.
Yeah,
nice.
Well, I tried to separate an extension cord from a regular cord, and I used my teeth to pry it, and
that's a good one too.
Burned a big hole in my mouth, so I've got this nice little scarred up mouth.
I got one.
Oh, is that where that little scar came from?
That's where it came from.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, we had a little a swimming pool in the backyard. One of those aluminum ones, and my mom used to have chlorine that she put in a thing that floated around there. Well, I liked the smell of that chlorine, one day I opened the fucking jar of chlorine and I stuck my nose in it and inhaled it, and that was the last thing I remember. I woke up on my back on the floor in the kitchen. I was like 7 years old or something, looking up, going, "What the hell?"
I
was a dumbass.
How did I get here?
I'm lucky I survived that one.
I think all men have had experiences that like we all have those experiences that we can say we lived through. They were all dumbass experiences.
I was driving through the desert with my cousin, and I was getting car sick, and so I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna sit on the hood of your car, while you drive the hood of the truck," and so I was just kind of holding on, leaning against the windshield. And so he's going really slow at first, and he got a little faster, and then all of a sudden he kind of took a blind corner, and there was this big boulder in the road. So he hit the brakes, and I'm Supermaning along the dirt road, and the car is skidding faster than I'm, skidding, and it ran over my foot, flipped my shoe across the desert. I broke one of my toes, and then we went and we were backpacking into this place. So we're hiking over Slick Rock for a mile or two, and he couldn't find the entrance to the canyon. I'm like, I think I should probably just go home. My foot's not doing great. He's like, yeah, your parents might kill me if I don't take you home now. So kind of cut the trip a little short, but it was kind of at the tail end anyway. But yeah.
And that, folks, is exactly what I was talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like
that's a good one. That's a good one though, Justin.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I've got a few like that, but
yeah, me too.
Yeah. So I guess humans are not immune to making stupid choices as well.
Yeah, see?
For sure.
For sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to agree with you. I mean, everything is, I don't know, man. The older I get, the less I find that there's any real hard truth to a lot of things. It's like, it's really, if A is true, then go to B. And then if B is true, then go to step C kind of thing. And there's so many variables, and everything is a little different, and depends on where you're at, what you're doing.
I'm curious living in Florida and being able to keep things outdoors, you've probably worked with a ton of different I know you've worked with a bunch of different species and all from all different walks of reptilian life. Do you find that you have more success with, like, say, more tropical types that like kind of the rain or the humidity of Florida, or do you struggle with like desert types that maybe more dry environment, or that kind of thing? Is there anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do. So it's actually both of those things are actually a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Rainforest species that are equatorial are tough here because of where our weather is not very stable. I mean, we do get cold relatively in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And then we get pretty damn hot in the summer. So we have, and neither one of those things tend to lend themselves well to rainforest species, that are used to being in like the mid 80s all the time. So that's a little difficult. And desert stuff obviously has issues with the water. There's a lot of misunderstanding. People think that relative air humidity is the problem, but it's actually not the problem at all. Relative humidity is largely, and actually, if anything, I think it works to our advantage because desert species, they're not living in the driest sections of the desert. They're seeking out humid areas in the desert. They're not out just in bare sand, being barbecued in the sun. So that's a little easier. But the problems that we run into are primarily around wintertime, where we get basically like we just went through, where we'll get a front that'll come down that'll drop the temperatures, anywhere from 70-ish during the day to the 40s at night, but it'll be overcast and or raining for multiple days in a row. That's a problem. Because without the sun to heat the enclosures up, they can't ever get to an operating temperature, and they're kind of kept at this state of limbo. Because we keep everything covered in plastic, greenhouse plastic. So as long as we get sun, it can get as cold as it wants, and everything will be just fine. But when you don't have sun, so that's a big problem. And we're actually kind of transitioning what we do. We're moving away from desert species altogether. She's got more of an interest in chameleons now, and so we're kind of lowering the bearded dragons and a lot of the desert stuff. And we're kind of more heading towards a knoll chameleon centered thing with the side projects that we do, the monitors and the skinks. The skinks actually work really well here. Those things they love it here. This is like perfect for them. They take the cold, they take the heat. Obviously they eat wild roaches. But yeah, I mean, I know that I've been working against myself for a long. I mean, 30 years ago, Bert Langerwerf slapped me in the head and said, what are you doing, boy? You're working on all this desert stuff. You live in Florida. You're stupid. You should go get a bunch of chameleons and frogs and work on stuff that likes the rain. You're killing yourself for nothing. And I was like, but I really like this stuff. I
like the other stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, it took me 54 years or whatever, 54 now to finally take his advice. But we were looking around here and I'm like, why are we banging our heads against the wall trying to, when we don't need to, and we could do just as well. And it'll be more fun. Chameleons are actually pretty cool. And there's there's not really a lot of chameleon breeders out there.
Right. A lot of them kind of come and go. And
it's brutal.
Yeah, it can be a challenge for sure. Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of where, a lot of work is needed because they're tricky. I mean, they're kind of like the insects of the reptile world in a lot of ways, where they just pump out eggs, breed really early,
and die.
And then they die. And if you don't have a plan for that, you're not keeping back a certain amount, they can kind of burn themselves out like a wildfire or something. I guess the monitors, some of the smaller monitors may be a little like that too. You have a few really good years and then they kind of slow down, and I don't know. But yeah, I was remembering similar conversation I had with Bert, about what species I could keep outdoors in Utah. Cause I was thinking, terrible climate for reptiles, but he's like, oh no, you could keep this one and this, they do just fine as long as you make sure this or that or the other, So yeah, there's ways to do this. And I'm actually, planning on this year to try to do some outdoor pits and try to get some things, at least for the majority of the year, outdoors. And that'd be a nice way to do it. So I think,
I would think Australian stuff would be relatively good there. Not necessarily,
in the winter.
But the southern stuff, especially Agernia, there's a whole bunch of them that come from places that get cold. And, a lot of the monitors do, there's a lot of stuff you could probably get away with pretty well.
Yeah.
And I've actually thought about this a lot, because I consider, well, what would happen if I had to leave Florida? How would I port this system that's got, 30, 40 years worth of iteration into something else? So I actually have a lot of thoughts about it and plans and stuff if it ever happens.
Yeah.
But one of the things, like the area that you live in, is one of those places that I looked at and I'm like, that's actually a pretty good spot, because I know you get snow and you can get some brutal winters where you're at, but you could just pull them for that, or give them underground heated boxes that are artificially heated. Just pray the power doesn't go out.
Yeah.
But,
or make them insulated enough that if it does, they have a couple days of thermal radiance or something.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I would stay the hell away from anything that's tropical. Equatorial stuff is just tough in general. Usually very specific in its requirements, and because it comes from a place that just
doesn't vary.
Doesn't vary.
It's Goldilocks.
That was the biggest surprise. I was always thinking, rainforest, it's hot and humid and, it's just miserable. But you go and it's like, oh, it's 70 degrees, 75 degrees in here. It's not that hot, and it's, it's dark and kind of easy going. So and then you look at like temperature graphs from like New Guinea, and they pretty much just have a flat line. Their whole year is just the same temperature, and day in and day out for the most part. It's just the moisture that varies, the amount of rainfall.
Doesn't New Guinea get cold in the winter though?
Maybe in some places, like high up on the mountains and stuff, but down like in the valleys, it's pretty much just same temperature year round.
Well, that explains why all those varanids from Indonesia are pretty hard to breed for them, except for the water monitor. Right. And that's because the water monitor has that stupid range where it's clearly adaptable to all sorts of, throw whatever at it, and it's just going to be like, all right, I'm still going to breed and produce anyway, because,
It's like a generalist varanid right there,
Yeah, and generalist species tend to be the best in captivity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So ones that can live in close to human habitation, they can pretty much survive anywhere. I was I think it was Dave Kaufman put out a video on Puerto Rico. He was herping in Puerto Rico, and they caught a wild retic in Puerto Rico. There's like a population of retics that had gotten out, and I think it was like a drug dealer had a big retic, the female or something, and he got busted and ran away and let his animals go. So good times. But
Puerto Rico is a problem. That could easily be a real problem.
Any island is just has those endemic birds that a lot of them have become flightless because they don't need to escape predators because they're out in the middle of the ocean on an island. But any introduction of predators. But then again, most islands have been spoiled a long time ago by rats.
Yeah, I mean, we globally trade now, so I mean, it's just like, I mean, the idea of not letting wildlife move between borders, but yet all this trade happens. Right. And it's like, how do you think mussels of foreign mussels got into the Great Lakes? Come on, man. Like, use your, it's just
exactly.
And then they're like, well, God, we couldn't possibly export any reptiles or anything out of this country. What would happen if it got loose? Like,
right.
Never mind,
Yeah, there.
Yeah, and we are the greatest invasive species
Yeah.
we are currently aware of.
That's
That
true.
has got to,
That's
and
a
that
good
has got to
point.
be the butt of the greatest joke on the since the dawn of
Yeah.
time, right?
Right. We're worried
Every
about
time I
these
hear
invasive
somebody,
species.
yeah, every
Yeah.
time I hear somebody, I mean, honestly, uh, there are a lot of animals in South Florida that aren't supposed to be there. But
Yeah.
I helped one of the biologists in the 90s. I'm not going to name him because I don't know if he wants to be involved in that. But
Sure.
the FWC biologist asked for my assistance on locating a bunch of species. He knew I was commercially collecting them for years. And so I took him out, spent some time. He was a friend of mine. And after he was done with the study, they concluded that the vast majority of them, and it was like 40 or 50 of them at the time, were not invasive. And as a matter of fact, what they were doing was they were filling niches that were where the native species were wiped out by human development.
Yeah.
Because they were all living in the city. They weren't out in the Everglades. And I couldn't, I mean, you could go out in the Everglades outside of Miami and not find a damn thing other than brown anoles. That was the only non-native species that was really prevalent. Now the Burmese are there now. And,
Yeah.
but they can't get out of there either. They're big. I'm sure they took a hell of a beating 2 weeks ago with that cold. They came
the cold
through.
snap. I wonder too if they're adapting to that, and successive generations will be less and less susceptible to those cold temperatures if they'll adapt.
That's possible.
Yeah,
that is possible.
Hopefully,
I think they're there to stay.
Yeah, but, I think that's proven itself. They're still around. But we had a research scientist that I think he was doing his PhD on the Burmese issue in South Florida, and was had kind of shown some data that made it look like they were all kind of related early on, and it looked like they were radiating out from a central point, and kind of led to the hypothesis that like one gravid female that was probably mean or something, and the owner's like, I can't handle this. So we went and released it in the 70s in the Everglades. And that one event, may have resulted in that radiation and emergence of all these different invasive Burmese pythons.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible. It's that is a problem. No one should have ever released large constrictors. That was going to kick our ass anyway. Once that got out, that was stupid.
And who was preaching this stuff in the 70s? Like we barely knew how to keep a reptile alive in the 70s. So it's hard to fault somebody back then. But
and then there's there's natural disasters where we get hit by shit all the time. There's accidents. There's there's a number of things. Accidents happen. That's just it.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a buddy that was breeding chameleons in the southwestern, part of the state in St. George, and he got a shipment of roaches or something. And like he got home and the corner of the box was all broken open and there were all these roaches crawling around, and you can still find that species, just out cruising, out in St. George, and they're completely introduced, but it was probably just an accident. The box got dropped wrong and now you got roaches. So, it's kind of, we got to be careful.
And I mean, it is interesting. Like, so, like you said, like the introduction of large invasive pythons happened. That's out of the box. Like that happened long ago. Right. Like, so now we're reacting to, legislatively to something that's already happened. And so what? So we banned scrub pythons. So do you think if scrub pythons got loose in the Everglades, so now you have two large constrictors competing for the same food source, like somebody's going to win that. And whether it's the scrub python or the retic or the berm or whatever, you still have a large constrictor filling a niche, a nipper. I'm sorry, nipper. In the Everglades. So it's like to me, it's kind of like I understand biologists' concern. I get that, but we're so far out of the box that this whole thing just reeks of it's so politically anti-pet driven that and the fact that you see a lot of And I don't know, maybe, I mean, maybe this is an unfair thing, but you see a lot of fish and wildlife buying into this. And it's like, well, yeah, it gives us legislative, regulatory power in order to make decisions that we want to. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and yeah, I'm sure funding is a thing. I'm sure, there's a lot of factors that have absolutely nothing to do with really actually regulating wildlife.
Yeah. If just the hypocrisy just drives me nuts. If you really want to make an impact on an invasive or a threat, some kind of species that's not good anywhere, it's cats. I mean, until you're willing to say, hey, we're going to ban cats, you got to ban cats before you ban just about anything else, because
because it's not about that.
Yeah, exactly. It's about
not fixing a problem. Mm-hmm. It's about getting funding agencies. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
What it is. Yeah,
it's never let a crisis go to waste. Mm-hmm. And it's about funding.
Well, and the face of it can't be a furry mammal.
Correct.
That's not going anywhere.
You get too much shit from the grandmas and and everybody else out there that would crawl up your ass, and you get a black eye in the public. But if you convince them that these irresponsible reptile owners are dumping shit everywhere and it's causing a catastrophe, I can promise you that. I mean, you can just look at what's done in Florida. They banned green iguanas that have been here it's far back. You can find photos from the 1900s before there was a fucking pet trade here of green iguanas when they were building the railroad down the Flagler Railroad. So they were already here. Now, when I grew up in Miami, when I was a little kid, they were all over the place. That was the 70s. And the pet trade was in full force by then, but they were always there.
Yeah.
They go back forever, right?
Yeah.
So they banned them. And everybody's like, and the commercial collectors that were actually taking them out of the environment can now no longer collect them. So you have to ask yourself, if the goal here was to get rid of an invasive species, why would you stop all of the people that are removing them? Mm-hmm. And the reason is, well, you'll be hearing about it more as time goes on, because that is what's going on here is a lot more than what's been told. That's not conspiracy theory. If you look at what some of basically there's environmental damage being caused here from something else. And it appears to have been driven by our government that oversees it, has been spraying enormous amounts of pesticide into the waterways, causing these huge algae blooms, these red tides on both coasts. They've been killing manatees and everything else. Well, guess who does that? That is completely done by Florida Fish and Game. That's what they do. That's their primary job, is they spray these waterways. Well, when all the sea life started to die a few years ago, it caught the attention of the environmental groups, and they've been putting pressure on them to cut this out. And if you look at the timeline, right at the time that they're getting hammered by that, all of a sudden they start looking at iguanas. So I mean, if your job is to remove invasive plants, and you know that the time is coming where you're no longer going to be able to spray enormous amounts of toxic chemicals into the waterways, well, you got to find some job security somewhere. Yeah. And you just transition from invasive plants to invasive reptiles. Because they're all over the place. Yeah. So I'm sure that's why they went after the green iguana. I know that it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but if you dig into this little topic enough, you'll find all sorts of interesting things with enormous amounts of money. Yeah. Being funneled into this stuff. And
it sounds exactly like an environmental case study to me. It sounds like, the story that you would figure out, like from, how an agency behaved when we were dealing with environmental pollution before the start of the EPA. It's very like redirect, right. Blame.
Right. Yep.
It's so frustrating.
Get it legal entanglements, like you can't do it because you can't fight us because we have more money than you that we got from raping and pillaging the land or whatever.
Right. So they made a boogeyman out of an industry, and so nobody's really looking at them while they transition over, and now they're going to get I don't even know what the budget is for something like that, but they'll get probably the same amount of money they were getting from the feds to take care of the plant problem. They'll just get it now they'll just transition to being iguana removers. I can't think of any other reason that you would stop that you would ban that animal. I mean, it just,
there's no sense in it except for maybe making
and it
money.
primarily feeds on non-native plants. Because all of Florida is all non-native plants. So it doesn't. I mean,
that doesn't sound as much like a conspiracy theory as truth.
I know, but in this day and age, anything you say gets. But I think as time moves forward, more of this will start to come out, especially once they really start hammering the environmental groups, get their lawsuits up. And
there was another great example that there was an invasive water plant that was in in choking waterways and stuff. But I guess it was people originally from Southeast Asia. They enjoyed eating that plant, and so they would go in and collect it and use it for a meal. And apparently a lot of these waterways were in a national park, and so they said, nope, you got to stop. You can't collect that because you're taking something out of a national park. And they're like, well, it's an invasive weed. What's the harm in that? And I mean, they were basically removing it for free for the government, and they didn't have to pay a cent, but they stopped it. And now, the waterways are choked, and there's nobody removing that plant unless they going in and spraying it or something like this.
I hate to tell you this, but you can just look at wildfires in California, and although it is climate induced, certainly the whole forestry management strategy that put all that fuel in the made it worse. Has exacerbated that. So, in the management industry, mismanagement has been commonplace, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, we've gotten a little far field of our topic, but I think that was really a useful discussion for sure. I mean, I think it all plays into it, but I think, overall, reptiles understand their environment and they will make, reasonable choices. I think it's when they start being, introduced to variables or conditions that they don't quite understand or haven't been evolutionarily programmed to understand, where you start getting problems. So, I like you said, keeping things that come from an environment that, you're from can be really helpful, especially if you're keeping them outdoors. That's definitely something to think about. But I think overall, reptiles definitely do make good decisions for the most part. There's certainly some small instances or a smaller number of instances where they don't make the best decisions. But so, I think reptiles in their environment are really smart. And you mentioned that earlier, intelligence and how we measure intelligence. And it seems like lizards might be, more intelligent than snakes, but, for their environment and what they need to do and what they need to get done, everything has a certain level of intelligence or it wouldn't be around anymore. It wouldn't survive.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's kind of how I'd summarize our the topic of discussion today. But
for sure. I agree. I think that's it.
And I think this was, for me, it was really a rewarding conversation. And I appreciate your insights because, you've been doing this a long time and you've got a lot of great insights. So I really appreciate you coming on and discussing this with us.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, me too. I appreciate you guys asking me. So I said, anytime, man.
We'll definitely have to have you back.
Welcome anytime.
I'm sure there's plenty of things you can have really good insights into. So thanks for doing this. For sure. We're thankful for you guys listening, and thanks to NPR Network. Check out their stuff, MoreliaPythonsRadio.com, and follow them on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that fun stuff. A lot of cool shows coming out. I've enjoyed some of the more recent ones. They've been a lot of fun. Chuck's episode was a great example of that. He got fired up and got some good discussion out of him on there. It's always
I have my moments.
Yeah. Any other good ones you've been hearing lately? Good podcast.
Are you asking me?
I started listening to the second episode of the Venom Exchange podcast, Phil's podcast.
Yeah.
They're talking to the Cloud King.
I saw that and I was like, oh man, I'm listening to that. But I at work, I've got people pulling me 10 different directions. So I try to sit down and listen to stuff, but it's like, I always get pulled away. So that's on my, that is like the next podcast I'm listening to. So
yeah, gosh, I don't know. There's so many cool reptiles, and clobber eye are definitely one of those
for sure.
The rock rattlesnakes are very cool animals, and I'm just like, after seeing the ridge-nosed rattlesnakes in Arizona, really I'm interested in those. They're so cool, just really cool animals, and I think the Cloud King keeps those as well. So very cool stuff. So yeah, check that out. Venom Exchange Radio, Nipper and Phil do a great job on that one.
Yeah.
So looks like they've got some cool guests lined up. So, well, lots of good content out there. But again, thanks for listening to Reptile Fight Club, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode.
Remind your legislators to keep their head out of their ass.
Fight Club.
Later.